In this video, we'll explore the story of Sarah Rector, one of the wealthiest Black women in America. Indeed, her story and how she rose to wealth and fame will shock anyone. Sarah and her family literally slept one day and woke up the next day as wealthy people. And no, she didn't win the lottery. Sarah Rector, also known as Sarah Rector Campbell and Sarah Campbell Crawford, was born in 1902 to parents of humble backgrounds. Her parents were freedmen. She had 5 siblings, and they all lived in an old town called Taft, located somewhere in the eastern portion of Oklahoma, formerly in Indian Territory. Rector's parents, Rose McQueen and her husband, Joseph Rector, were the Black grandchildren of Creek Indians, enslaved by Creek tribe members before the Civil War. They were descendants of the Muskogee Creek Nation after the 1866 treaty. Joseph Rector was the son of John Rector, a Creek freedman, and the son of Molly McQueen and Benjamin McQueen. Benjamin McQueen, Sarah's great-grandfather, was enslaved by Riley Grayson, a Creek Indian. Under the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887, also known as the General Allotment Act, established after the Civil War, Rector's parents were entitled to land allotments. This means that their descendants were listed as freedmen on the Dawes rolls, by which they were also entitled to land allotments under the Treaty of 1867. The United States made this treaty with the 5 civilized tribes. The law authorized the president to break up reservation land which was held in common by members of a tribe into small allotments to be parceled out to individuals. This means that Native Americans registering on a tribal roll were granted allotments of reservation land for free. Sarah Rector was among the many Black children or Creek freedmen miners who benefited from this scheme. They were each granted 160 acres of land as part of the plan to integrate the old Indian Territory with Oklahoma Territory in the effort to form the state of Oklahoma in 1907. It's interesting to note that lands granted to former slaves were typically rocky and infertile. Other lands considered superior and more suitable for farming were reserved for white settlers and members of the tribe. Sarah Rector's allotment from the Creek Indian Nation was located in Glenpool, Oklahoma, about 60 miles from her family's home located in the middle of Glenpool oil field, and was initially valued at a paltry $556.50. The family lived in a humble cabin and were comfortable. But unknown to the authorities, Sarah's parcel contained rich oil deposits which would later make her enormously wealthy. But soon after this event, Sarah's father, Joseph Rector, became burdened with the annual 30% property tax for Sarah's parcel. So he petitioned the Muskogee County Court to sell the land. Unfortunately, his petition to sell the land was denied because of some restrictions placed on the land. This meant he was required to continue paying the taxes. Having no other alternative, Sarah's father decided to lease the land to the Standard Oil Company in February 1911. This way, they were able to take care of the property tax burden until 2 years later, when her fortune and everything else changed forever. In 1913, an independent oil driller, B.B. Jones, drilled a well on Sarah's property and produced a gusher that began generating 2,500 barrels or 105,000 gallons of oil per day. As soon as this discovery was made, Sarah Rector began to receive a daily income of $300 from the exploration. That's about $8,000 to $9,000 today. In the same year, the Savannah Tribune wrote, "Oil well producers need income. Negro girls $112,000 a year." Another newspaper called her the richest Negro in the world. At this point, she was only 11 years old. And of course, her sudden wealth drew attention from the press, white businessmen, the government, and even international communities. The law at the time required full-blooded Indians, Black adults, and children who were citizens of old Indian Territory with significant property and money to be assigned well-respected white guardians. Because of this law, the moment Rector began to earn that amount of money, there was increasing pressure to change her guardianship from her parents to a local white resident known to the family. T.J. Porter, a local white resident in the town, was later appointed Rector's guardian to manage her income. Rector's parcel was later included in the Cushing Drumright oil field, an oil field in northeastern Oklahoma, which is about 12 miles east of Cushing and 1 mile north of present-day Drumright. In October 1913, this young woman received royalties from oil proceeds totaling $11,567, making her the richest Black woman in the United States. By the time Sarah was 18, she she was already a black millionaire, with oil earnings worth about $145 million in today's value. At age 11, she'd amassed a record amount of wealth for a person of her age and color. At this point, the Oklahoma legislature wanted to declare Rector white, which will elevate her social profile and allow her to reap the full benefits of her elevated social standing, such as riding in first-class cars on the trains. Later, in 1914, an African-American journal called the Chicago Defender took an interest in Sarah Rector just when rumors started spreading that she was a white immigrant who was being kept in poverty. The newspaper published an article claiming that Rector's estate was being mismanaged by her white guardian and her ignorant parents. They further claimed that she was uneducated, dressed in rags, and lived in an unsanitary shanty. An inquiry was launched by national African American leaders Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who became concerned about Rector's welfare. Later in June of that year, a special agent for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, James C. Waters Jr., sent a memo to Du Bois regarding her situation. Waters had been corresponding with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the United States Children's Bureau over concerns regarding the mismanagement of Rector's estate. Concerning her financial guardian, Waters Jr. said, "Is it not possible to have her cared for in a decent manner and by people of her own race, instead of by a member of a race which would deny her and her kind the treatment accorded a good yard dog?" When Du Bois received Waters' memo, he decided to establish another department of the NAACP, focusing on black children assigned a white guardian. The Children's Department of NAACP would investigate claims about white guardians' suspected deprivation of black children of their land and wealth. Washington also intervened to help the Rector family. In October of that year, Sarah was enrolled in the Children's School, a boarding school for teenagers at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, which was headed by Washington himself. When she graduated, she attended the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. In the words of Tanya Bolden, a history writer, at the age of 11, Sarah was a very rich young girl. Even so, she was powerless, helpless in the whirlwind of drama and danger that swirled around her. In her book Searching for Sarah Rector, The Richest Black Girl in America, Bolden detailed the events of Sarah's life set against the backdrop of American history, including the creation of Indian Territory, the making of Oklahoma with its black towns and boom towns, and the wild behavior of many greedy and corrupt grown-ups. One of the profound things that Bolden tried to establish in her book after thorough research was that the claims about Rector's wealth being mismanaged and her not being educated were untrue. An interesting part of Sarah's story was how she started getting marriage proposals from different people because of her enormous wealth. As news of Rector's wealth spread worldwide, she began receiving requests for loans, money gifts, and marriage proposals, even though she was only 12 years old at the time. In January 1914, the Kansas City Star local newspaper published the headline, "Oil Made Pickaninny Rich. Oklahoma Girl with $15,000 a month gets many proposals. 4 white men in Germany want to marry the Negro child that they might share her fortune." Not so much is known about Rector's teenage years, but she's believed to have lived well and was rich. By the time she was 18 in 1920, Rector was a millionaire by the time she'd turned 18, and had acquired more properties aside from her land in Tuskegee, Oklahoma. She bought stocks, bonds, a boarding house, a bakery business, and a 2,000-acre, that's 810 hectares, piece of prime river bottomland. Rector and her family later left Tuskegee and moved to Kansas City, Missouri, where she purchased a large mansion on 12th Street, which would be known as the famous Rector House. Also in 1920, just after moving to Kansas City with her family, she married Kansas businessman Kenneth Campbell. It was an intimate wedding with only her mother and Campbell's paternal grandmother present. The couple had 3 sons, but the marriage only lasted 10 years. They divorced in 1930, and Rector remarried in 1934 to a local restaurant owner named William Crawford. In Kansas, Rector and her family were recognized as local celebrities, or what you might call a royal family. She entertained several guests and people of high social status from time to time, such as Duke Ellington and Count Basie. Unfortunately, during the Great Depression, Rector lost much of her wealth. She eventually moved out of her mansion on 12th Street to 2440 Brooklyn Avenue. She continued to live in Kansas City for almost 50 years. Since then, the mansion has had multiple different owners and tenants, including a funeral home and office space for the 12th Street Heritage Development Corporation, and now sits vacant. The building is currently owned by a local nonprofit organization that aims to restore and preserve the history and culture of the area. The organization, known as United Inner City Services, UICS, is a local nonprofit that works with communities across the Kansas City metro area. The organization is working to restore the Rector Mansion to preserve her legacy. UICS later applied for historical and cultural preservation grants to aid the restoration of the home with hopes of converting it into a cultural center, museum, or economic incubator. Sarah Rector died at the age of 65 in 1967 after suffering a stroke. If you enjoyed this documentary, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The video on the screen is an incredible story about Robert Smalls, who went from slave to congressman. Click on it now to watch.